Let's put our other two trials on the back burner for now and talk about the Harvey Weinstein prosecution here in Manhattan, where my colleague Jesse Weber is now live outside the courtroom for us. Jesse, you've been watching this proceeding all along here this morning, and bottom line, jury's been out for about 5 hours. We understand that they're back deliberating now, or they will be very, very soon. So what's happened this morning thus far in that courtroom? My understanding is more fights about juror number 11.
Yeah, hey, Aaron. So first, the jury has continued their deliberations. One thing that was interesting was the fact that they weren't called back into the courtroom where the judge says, please continue deliberating. They have just continued their deliberations. But yes, Damon Chironis, on behalf of the defense, once again wanted Juror 11 kicked off. As you recall, she is the first came into controversy during the jury selection process because she was penning this novel about predatory older men. But yesterday, her name came up again, or her seat came up again, and the idea that she has been reviewing and reading books on predatory older men, in fact, posting a review during the course of this trial. Well, Damon Chironis today basically said to the judge, you didn't thoroughly question her yesterday. You asked her about these books, but she reviewed a book already, and you seem to focus more on her reviewing this French book, which she said that she hasn't completed yet. She's currently reading it, but you really didn't focus on the first book, which she reviewed, which was about predatory older men. And basically, the Damon Chironis wanted her kicked off the jury and replaced with another juror who's an alternate, a older white male. Again, as Damon Chironis had said yesterday, it's nothing personal. It's not that they don't like her. They just feel that she has not been so candid with the court. Again, he said that she lied basically to the court yesterday when asked, are you reviewing books? And she says, I don't know what you're talking about. She eventually then conceded that she was reading this French book. And the judge said, look, I do agree that these books were interposed when I was questioning her, but the bottom line is she hasn't done anything wrong. You know, there was no order put on these jurors to not review books or read books. They just can't talk about to the media. They can't read anything about this case. They're not supposed to discuss this case. Reading those books is not something that they're not technically supposed to do. But as you can imagine, the jury believes that she is biased against their client, Harvey Weinstein.
So, Jesse, we're splitting the world's smallest hair with the world's finest razor here, it seems, because, okay, she might not be reading about this case, but she's reading and commenting on the exact subject matter of this case. One could argue if you're the defense. If you're the prosecution, you're turning around and arguing and saying, well, it's not about this case.
And that's an easy argument to make, but what's the practical reality of this? I mean, what do you think juror number 11 is doing in that jury deliberation room? Is she leading the cause against Harvey Weinstein? That's possibly what the defense presumes she's doing. And should she even be on this jury to begin with, given this controversial novel that she was penning and also her reviews of these books? Look, there's a question, why is the judge allowing this? And my personal opinion, based upon everything I've seen, is the judge seems to be very keen on validating the process of jury selection. Remember, the defense team here was always trying to get this case moved to a different jurisdiction, feeling that they could not get an impartial jury, and yet the judge said, look, we had summons, we brought these jurors in, they filled out questionnaires, both sides were able to question them. This is a process that works. We are going to continue with this trial, and we are going to have an impartial jury. I believe one of the reasons why he didn't want to kick Juror 11 off is because she said that she could be impartial despite everything, and for him to have someone slip through the cracks of this process, to slip through the cracks of this a validated jury selection process, that's not something that he wanted. Having said that, the judge, during a lot of times during the defense's questioning of these issues, has said, look, you're making a record, make a record of it, and that's that. He has to understand that if Harvey Weinstein gets convicted, the defense is going to appeal it and has possibly some grounds for an appeal.
I mean, here's the thing with appeal, though, Jesse, and this is where this is going to go next. Defense clients, defendants really don't win when they appeal findings of fact that a jury makes. So if hypothetically, this jury comes back and says guilty on one or any of the charges, all of the charges maybe even, then getting an appeal on a finding of fact that these were rapes as deemed by the state, that's not going to win. What's going to win is an appeal on a process. If there's something wrong with a process, there was a evidence rule that was not decided properly, or there was some other issue with the process. Process appeals are where the defense has a shot at winning something here. So why would the judge want to inject a possible process appeal here unless the judge knows a lot more about the case law, which he may, and I assume that he does, in New York, that maybe this isn't the sort of appeal that would get traction in New York?
Yeah, Aaron, you make a really great point. Why even make that an issue? Why even open yourself up to that? Why even open yourself up to having this decision ultimately overturned in a possible appeal? And the question, of course, is, does the judge believe that this would be grounds for an appeal? Because you have one juror who maybe is questionable, but what about the 11 other jurors here? Are they all going to be swayed by this one juror who happened to read a book about and review a book on predatory sexual assault? Same thing, let's say that we had a murder trial and somebody is a big fan of serial killer movies. Is that something that might be grounds for an appeal? Is that something that a juror should be ultimately dismissed for? Maybe, maybe not. And I think, again, the big issue for the judges is if we go back to 4 weeks ago, and if the judge said, okay, I'm going to get rid of this juror, she slipped through the cracks of this process, then he'd be in a position to say, well, who else slipped through the cracks of my process that I thought was going to work? And that's a problem. Having said that, the judge has to realize that since the defense keeps bringing this up and is making seeming very validated arguments, that this could be an issue later on. And, I don't know what the judge seems to be thinking at this point, but like you said, maybe he knows more than we do.
Jesse, homework assignment right now. I'm going to start reading the case law in New York on biased jurors. I started to pull it up right now. I'll have to get back to you on what I find. There's another issue at play here with this juror number 11 that we've been watching here in the newsroom, and that's that if this juror were to get tossed off, again hypothetically, then the first alternate is another white male, and it would change the makeup of the jury, because there's been some criticism that half of the members of this jury are white men like Harvey Weinstein, and it would tip that balance potentially in the favor of the defense.
Yeah, and it's easy to assume which way this alternate juror would go, given the similarities between this man and Harvey Weinstein. But then again, who knows which way this juror would ultimately sway. I will say what was interesting yesterday, in my perspective, when the jury was excused, it appeared that the jurors seemed to be confused that the three alternates left. And I'm not sure if they knew that these three were alternates, that they weren't going to be part of the deliberations. I had seen some conversations with this older white gentleman, this alternative juror, with another jury member, and I'm curious, what those conversations were about. Were they forming some sort of rapport? Maybe they were looking forward to deliberating this case together, but it seems that there was a sense of surprise on the rest of the jurors that were ultimately there. Having said that, these three alternates, they're floating around the city somewhere. They're on call, and if for some reason something happens with juror number 11, the judge ultimately feels that she should be dismissed, this man will come in and jump into those deliberations.
And Jesse, we had plenty of questions from the jury yesterday. The first one was the one that was a bit startling to me. It basically suggested that, if we don't believe the two primary accusers here, Mimi Haley and Jessica Mann, can we convict if we only believe Annabella Shora? Well, the case isn't all about Annabella Shora. She's there to back up the two others, and if they don't believe the two others, then this theoretically should be an acquittal across the board. So that must have given the state some pause, but then some of the other questions asked whether or not a mixed verdict was possible and things like that, which is something that I've thought is a possibility going into this case from the beginning, because you've got different accusers from different people all swimming around. You've got the two primary accusers. You've got the four other bad acts witnesses that took the stand as well. So there are different shades of the crimes alleged. There are different accusers with different personal experiences and potentially different believability quotients there. How did you take the jury questions as a whole yesterday? Here's your chance to read those tea leaves like we're all trying to do.
So there's two ways of looking at it. You could say, oh, wow, really? That's not great for the prosecution. They really don't believe Miriam Haley or Jessica Mann. They're really focused on Annabella Shora, and they seem to ask, why is there no standalone charge with Annabella Shora? I like to think of it like this. We heard these questions within the first 45 minutes of deliberations. they're confused. I had said this before, and I'll say it again. The way the verdict sheet is laid out, the way the charges are laid out, the way we had the Molyneux witnesses, why we are considering Annabella Shore, these are complicated questions for lawyers and analysts and reporters. What do you think it's like for this jury who maybe, and they're not supposed to, be reading anything about this case? I mean, the first questions they had were about legal definitions on consent and forcible compulsion. They wanted to know if they can find him guilty of both counts of rape with respect to Jessica Mann or and as well as predatory sexual assault. They wanted to know about, well, if predatory sexual assault, do we need to find him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt with respect to Annabella Shore and Jessica Mann? It seems to be that this verdict sheet and this instructions just weren't clear enough. And maybe at the very least, they're just trying to set up an understanding of what their options are. Maybe they haven't decided one way or another if they're going to find Harvey Weinstein guilty of anything, but they want to understand where they're supposed to go. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is, yes, maybe they realize there are weaknesses in the cases of Miriam Haley and Jessica Mann, but perhaps what they heard about Annabella Shore, particularly asking again yesterday for the exhibits of these red flag lists, these emails concerning a red flag list. Again, the idea here is that Harvey Weinstein wanted Annabella Shore investigated even before she went public with her claims, which would suggest that he knows he did something wrong with her. Why were they curious about that? Why did they want to look at that? Because maybe that's the strongest evidence to support Annabella Shore's claims. So in other words, maybe they feel that she has the strongest claim and Miriam Haley and Jessica Mann do not. But hey, reading the tea leaves, trying to assume, very hard to predict what a jury's thinking. We're going to wait for the next jury questions, which I imagine we'll get today.
Yeah, this jury seems very engaged in the process at a minimum. And look, New York trials are tricky, Jesse, because they don't let the jury have a lot of paperwork back in the room. Everybody's got to come out for readbacks. And forgive me, I should know this, Jesse, but did the jury take notes in this case, or were there no notes allowed?
Yeah, I want to comment on two things. Yes, they took notes. The judge instructed them they're not supposed to just rely heavily on those notes instead of what they heard during the course of testimony. They were allowed notes. Those notes are going to be brought in. Having said that, I do want to pick up on something that you mentioned, that they don't get any written instructions in terms of definitions. So they asked, well, what is the definition of consent? What is the definition of forcible compulsion? What is the definition of predatory sexual assault? The judge said, I can't give you written definitions. I can't provide that to you. I can give you readbacks. I can read it back to you as many times as you like. And they're probably wondering, why is that the case? What's going on here? But that is an interesting rule that they can't get those written definitions during their deliberations. Having said that, they do have their notes. They can get any exhibit that's in evidence that they want. They've already requested a few right now. And based upon their questions, it seems to me that they're considering the first two counts, predatory sexual assault, criminal sex act, Annabella Shore, Miriam Haley. Maybe they've come to a consensus on those charges. Maybe they have not. But if they have, then today is probably going to be all about Jessica Mann, which, given what we've heard about that account, may be a more concise or simpler analysis, given a lot of issues with respect to her account.
You know, the notes are helpful, certainly. I served on a New York civil jury years and years ago when I was a young reporter upstate, and it's hard to not have a lot of paperwork and definitions back in the jury room. I've sat in that chair, and I understand the way it's like. For jurors in New York, the process isn't easy for jurors in this state. And again, it's one of those systems that one has to wonder if some reforms might be able to help, because in other states, Jesse, as you know from sitting here, other states do allow jurors to have definitions and whatnot back there. And I have ringing in my ears the words that an attorney said to me years ago as a young reporter, also upstate, that his biggest fear was that jurors would be back in the room making up their own definitions of words used in statutes. And he was always worried about that. I don't even remember who it was. I wish I could give that attorney credit, but I remember that conversation, and it rings in my ears right now that that's always the greatest fear if you're an attorney. Law&Crime's Jesse Weber, though, outside the Harvey Weinstein
Aaron, you're
courtroom,
100% right.
Keeping us updated, yeah. Okay, we're gonna head to a break right now on Law&Crime. Jesse, I know you'll have more updates for us as the morning goes on. We'll be back with more live coverage of the cases we're following this morning.